Hello and welcome. Today I'm very excited to be showing you how to make a crazy Victorian patchwork bag. I've been wanting to make one of these for ages. First you'll need to cut yourself a piece of fabric to put your patchwork pieces onto. I'm using a piece of calico, but any cotton or linen fabric will do the job. Mine is 16 inches by 38 inches. I've done it this way in one continuous piece so that I'm going to hand stitch it all together so that I don't get too many seams to hand stitch. So once you've got your piece of fabric, you need to start by putting your pieces of patchwork onto it. So here's my first square, starting with quite a big one. We just lay that down. So you lay that down, don't need to pin it, and then choose your second piece of fabric. I'm going to choose this piece here, and you need to fold under, well, in my case I need to fold under this side that's going here, fold that under and place it on top of the one we've already got laid down. I'm just going to put a pin in it to hold that in place. Then I'm going to find the next piece I would like, which is going to be this piece. I have already folded these sides down, but fold the side under and then place it and then pin it. Okay, I'm just going to put one pin at the top so I don't have to keep removing pins later on. Right, next I'm going to have this piece of cotton fabric and I'm going to place that there, pin it, and right, I'm going to put two pieces on the end here. So I'm going to go with a nice thin strip like that, just here, and then next to it we're going to have this one. Yes, I think I'm okay with that. So we're going to pin and pin. Okay, most of these fabrics that I'm using are vintage. This one isn't. You'll see that this one is in this quilt behind me, but most of them are 1950s, 1960s. I do have some antique pieces, but the vast majority are vintage. Right, but you don't have to use vintage fabric. You can use any of your offcuts, and that's absolutely fine. Continue pinning and placing all of your scraps, making sure that you turn over the edges by about ½ an inch and make sure that all raw edges are covered. Your fabric scraps can be any shapes, they don't need to be squares. As you can see here, I've just put a triangular one on. You can also use ribbon and lace, and later you can decorate it with buttons as well. If you prefer, you can iron some of your edges down, but most fabrics will just finger press. Some of my fabrics were a little bit creased because they'd been in a bag for a long time or scrunched up, so I did need to iron some of them. As you can see now, I've gone ahead and pinned lots of my squares or pieces of fabric down onto my calico, and I've pinned them all in place. I've not got all the way down, but I've decided to start tacking or basting, whichever you prefer to say, some of the top pieces on, because actually I've run out of pins anyway, so I need to baste some of the top pieces down. Once you've tacked or basted all of your first pieces of fabric down, you can then start adding the rest of them. Carry on folding over your raw edges and pinning your pieces to your piece of calico or whatever fabric you're using until the whole area is full. If you feel a piece of fabric is too big for the area you want to cover, trim it down so it matches the size of the other pieces that you're using. Once the entire piece of fabric has been filled with squares or pieces of fabric, it's time to baste them all into position. Just do large stitches just to secure them in place until you've done all the fancy stitches. Before going on to do your embroidery, trim your crazy patchwork down to the same size as the calico. You can see here on this one that I have already started my embroidery, but ideally you want to trim the sides before you start the embroidery, but I'm being very careful not to cut into any of the embroidery. Then take a small object like a small plate and place it in one of the corners of the top edge, draw around it and do exactly the same on the opposite side. Place it right up to the corners, right up to the side, draw around it, and then you can cut both of your corners off so you've got rounded corners, and this is on the part of the bag which will be the flap which will come over the bag when you close it. Now you're ready to start the embroidery. You'll need a small pair of scissors, an embroidery needle, possibly a needle threader, an embroidery hoop, possibly, and some embroidery floss. So I'll start with this one here, and what I'm going to do I think is a feather stitch to join here and up there, and I need to choose a colour. So don't have an awful lot of colours. I think I'm going to use this one. Okay, now I'm not the world's greatest embroiderer, so I'm going to use a ruler to draw lines so I do my embroidery straight. On this first piece here I'm going to do feather stitch, so I actually need 4 lines, so I'm going to draw my 4 lines before I start. I will be putting out a separate video showing how to do all the basic embroidery stitches that I'm using on my bag, so I'm not going to go through it now, but on this piece here I'm doing a feather stitch. This will be one of the stitches included in my next video. Another stitch I used is a running stitch, and again for this I've drawn a nice straight line for me to sew along so I can keep nice and straight. Then I did a cross stitch. This time I'm using a pink thread. I've used all different coloured embroidery floss throughout, and I'm using 3 strands of the embroidery floss for this. Blanket stitch is another stitch that I used quite a lot.
also made some stars and lazy daisies for filling stitches, and a few made up stitches on some of the plain fabrics that I used. I'm using some French knots here to make some little flowers. I did groups of 3 French knots to make the flowers, and then I made some green stems and leaves. With this bag there are no rules, you can do whatever you like. I have sewn on here a vintage ready-made embroidered flower, and I've made it a bit of a feature on the front flap of my bag. For the side panels you will need 2 pieces of calico 12 inches long and 4.5 inches wide, 2 pieces of batting 11 inches long and 3.5 inches wide, and 2 pieces of outer fabric 4.5 inches wide and 12 inches long. And these need to be something that is patterned, unless you want to do more patchwork. Pin your fabrics together with your calico on the bottom, batting in the middle and your patterned fabric on the top. Then thread your needle with a contrasting colour of embroidery thread and embroider around your patterns on your fabric. I'm going around the leaves, the branches and the birds. It acts as quilting and holds 3 pieces of fabric together. When you've finished embroidering both of your panels, find something round to draw around to mark off rounded corners at both of the bottom corners, and then cut these. Now you are ready to join your side panels to the bag. So starting with right side spacing, pin your side panels to the front of your bag, making sure that you start at the side with the square edge and not the side with the rounded edge, because that will be your front flap. Pin all the way down until you get to the rounded corners, and then using a pair of scissors clip about 1/8 of an inch around the bag so that it will fit around the curved corners. Do this on both sides and continue clipping and pinning all of the way around until you've got your first side panel attached or pinned, and then do exactly the same with the other side, and then stitch your side panels in place. You can hand stitch as I did, or if you prefer you can do this on a sewing machine. I did a back stitch and took a 1/2 inch seam allowance. If you use your sewing machine to do this, remember to back tack at the start and finish, and again you'll be taking a 1/2 inch seam allowance. When you've sewn both side panels on, turn your bag the right side out and you're ready to start making the lining. To do this, cut 1 piece of fabric 38 inches long and 16 inches wide, and remember to round the corners off on the top end of your bag, and then cut 2 side panels 12 inches long and 4.5 inches wide, and round the 2 bottom corners off. Pin the side panels to the bag starting at the front and remembering to clip the edges as you go around the curves on the panels. When you've pinned it all in place, you can either hand stitch it doing a back stitch, or if you prefer you could do this on your sewing machine. It's entirely up to you. Whichever way you do it, take a 1/2 inch seam allowance. When you've sewn in both side panels and given them a good press, and with the bag inside out and the lining the right side out, place the lining inside the bag, so you should end up with your 2 right sides facing together, and then pin in place. Start by matching up the side seams and pinning these in place, making sure that one of your seams goes to one side and the other seam to the other side, so you don't end up with too much bulk in one place. Continue to match up the seams on both of the sides, and then you can continue pinning all the way around your bag, starting with the main part of the bag, and when you've done that, carrying on and going all the way around the flap to close the bag. Of course, you will need a strap for your bag. You can either do like I'm doing and use some webbing, or you could make your own strap. Thread your strap between your lining and your main bag fabric at both of the sides. When you've threaded it all the way through, pin the first side in place, making sure you get it dead in the centre. When I did this, I did have to unpin a little bit of the front of my bag and then pin it back together again once I have the second side pinned in place, but you must make sure that you keep your strap nice and straight and don't get any kinks in it. That's why I unpinned it, just to make sure that I could get it straight. And when you found the centre, place it between the bag and the lining and then pin in place, and then you can go back and put your pins back around the front of the bag. Ideally, it would be best to attach the strap before you start pinning the rest of your bag, but I forgot. Doesn't matter, you can do it this way if you want to. Then on the front of your bag, mark an opening where you'll turn your bag the right side out. I marked a gap of 4 inches for my opening. I did cheat and use my sewing machine to sew my bag to the lining, and when I got to the straps I've sewed backwards and forwards a few times to secure it, and I removed all my pins as I went along, and I took a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then through the opening that you left, turn your bag the right side out. Put your hand inside the opening and pull out the lining first. Keep pulling until all the lining is out, and then you will be able to turn the bag the right side out as well. Before you close the opening, sew your button in place. Now sew up the opening that you left to turn your bag the right side out. make your buttonhole, first measure your button and add 1/8 of an inch to this measurement, and then work out where you'd want the opening on your front flap. Then draw a line the width of your button plus the 1/8 of an inch, making sure that it's nice and level and central to your flap. Then draw a line an eighth of an inch above this first line and 1/8 of an inch below it. Then using a sharp knife, cut along the central line to make an opening for your buttonhole. If, like me, you haven't quite cut to the end, you can use a pair of scissors just to finish it off so you get right to the edge. Then using a buttonhole stitch, sew all the way around the edge of your buttonhole. And your finished bag should look something a bit like this.